What if I told you that one of the most devastating psychological weapons ever deployed against men in the 20th century wasn't a bomb, a bullet, or a propaganda poster, but a single, buried sociological report? A document so explosive, so utterly contradictory to the foundational myth of a totalitarian regime that the most ruthless political machine in modern history, the Nazi SS, classified it, hid it, and hoped it would never see the light of day. This isn't a conspiracy theory, this is historical fact. And within the next minutes, you will understand why this single act of bureaucratic suppression reveals a dark, uncomfortable truth about female nature, male obligation, and the silent war that has been waged against the masculine spirit for generations. This is not just history, this is a key to understanding the modern world, a case study in why so many men today feel a profound sense of betrayal, and a roadmap for how to reclaim the power that was systematically engineered out of you. The story of this report is the story of the Black Pill, written not on internet forums, but in the blood and ink of the Third Reich.
Before we begin, if you're serious about personal growth, not just the comforting lies, but the brutal, unvarnished truth, then you'll find real value in my ebook, The Black Book of Human Nature. It's a practical manual that breaks down the suppressed truths of human behavior, giving you the tools to finally understand yourself and the world more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment.
Our story begins not in the chaos of war, but in the cold, calculating mind of Heinrich Himmler. As the Reichsfuhrer SS, Himmler was the chief architect of the Nazis' racial ideology. He wasn't just a madman, he was a bureaucrat of madness, a man obsessed with building a 1,000-year Reich on a foundation of what he considered biological purity. This required the complete loyalty and unwavering commitment of every German, man and woman. For men, the path was clear: valor in battle, stoic duty, and a willingness to die for the state. But for women, the role was more complex. They were the guardians of the hearth, the mothers of the race, the stable, loyal center around which the warrior could orbit. The entire propaganda apparatus of the Third Reich was dedicated to reinforcing this image. The faithful German woman, her heart swelling with pride as she sent her son to the front, her loyalty as unshakable as the mountains of Bavaria. This was the myth, and Himmler, paranoid and detail-obsessed, wanted to know if it was true. So in the early 1940s, he commissioned a secret study. This wasn't to be some public opinion poll. This was an internal SS security matter. The man tasked with this sensitive mission was SS Oberfuhrer Dr. Wilhelm Spengler, a sociologist attached to the SD, the SS Intelligence Service. His orders were simple, yet profound. Investigate the morale and, specifically, the loyalty of German women to their men who were fighting at the front. Spengler and his team were given unprecedented access. They could cross-reference male censorship reports, interview soldiers on leave, debrief field police, and analyze internal party communications. They were to deliver the unvarnished truth. And what they found shattered the central pillar of Nazi gender ideology into a million pieces. Imagine you are a young German soldier. Let's call him Karl. You are 19 years old, freezing in a foxhole somewhere outside Stalingrad. The world has shrunk to mud, fear, and the constant thunder of artillery. The only thing that keeps you human, the only tether to the world you once knew, is the letters from home. Specifically, the letters from your sweetheart, Anna. You met before the war, promised to wait for each other. Her letters are filled with talk of her work in the factory, how she misses you, how proud she is. You carry her photograph, the edges frayed from constant handling. It is your talisman against the horror. Now, imagine the mail call. You get a letter, but it's not from Anna. It's from your mother. Her words are hesitant, careful. She tells you that Anna has been seen frequently with a French prisoner of war assigned to a local work detail. Then she says Anna has moved in with a high-ranking party Nazi official, a man in his 40s who has a heart condition that keeps him safely out of the war. The letter ends with, "I'm so sorry, my son. Be strong." In that moment, the foxhole doesn't just feel cold, it feels like a tomb. Your reason for surviving, for fighting, evaporates. What are you dying for? Not for the fatherland, an abstract concept that now seems like a cruel joke. You are dying for a regime that has taken your youth, your freedom, and now your reason for living. This wasn't an isolated tragedy. According to the Spengler report, it was an epidemic. The initial findings were so shocking that Spengler's team deepened their investigation. They discovered that infidelity among soldiers' wives and girlfriends was not just common, it was rampant. And the data they compiled was chillingly specific. In major cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Cologne, estimates suggested that over half of the women with partners at the front were engaged in extramarital affairs. But the real kicker, the detail that sent a chill down the spines of the SS analysts, was the pattern of this betrayal. It wasn't random. The report meticulously documented that women were overwhelmingly unfaithful with men who represented one of two things: heightened status or immediate security. They were leaving their frontline soldiers for high-ranking party functionaries, industrialists and factory managers, men with power and privilege. Or they were taking up with foreign workers and prisoners of war, not out of some grand romantic passion, but as a transactional exchange. A French POW could provide coffee, chocolate, or other scarce luxuries. He represented a resource in a time of deprivation. The women's loyalty, the report coldly concluded, was not to the man nor to the nation, but to a primal calculus of survival and advantage. Consider the case of Frau Schmidt, a composite figure drawn from the report's case studies. Her husband, a sergeant in the Afrika Korps, was missing in action, presumed captured. Within 3 months of receiving the news, Frau Schmidt had become the mistress of a local Gauleiter's assistant. She wrote to the Red Cross to stop searching for her husband, stating it was a waste of resources. When a neighbor confronted her, she reportedly said, "A living dog is better than a dead lion." This wasn't the heroic, self-sacrificing woman of propaganda posters. This was hypergamy in its rawest and most brutal form. The report even noted a macabre phenomenon. Divorce rates in Germany skyrocketed during the war, initiated predominantly by women whose husbands were at the front. They were legally severing ties to men they perceived as losers, as liabilities, as ghosts that had not yet had the decency to die.
The Spengler report was a bomb. It provided empirical, data-driven proof that the idealized concept of female loyalty, the very bedrock upon which the morale of the Wehrmacht was supposed to rest, was a fiction. The implications were catastrophic for the regime. If this information leaked, it would decimate the fighting spirit of the German army. What soldier would risk his life for a homeland that had already cuckolded him? The report proved that the Nazi state, for all its bluster about strength and loyalty, had failed its most basic psychological contract with its men. It had asked for everything, and in return, it could not even guarantee the fidelity of their women. Himmler, upon reading the final draft, was reportedly furious, but his anger wasn't directed at the women, it was directed at the report itself. The truth was an inconvenience. The solution was not to address the problem, but to bury the evidence. The Spengler report was classified as Geheime Reichssache, secret Reich matter, stamped for the eyes of the highest echelon only, and locked away in the deepest vaults of the SS archives. It was an attempt to erase a truth that was too dangerous to acknowledge. This act of burial is one of the most significant, yet overlooked, events of the war. It's a moment where ideology collided with reality, and reality was deemed too dangerous to exist. But why does this matter to you, sitting here today? Because the burial of the Spengler report is the ultimate historical black pill. It is a case study that demonstrates a universal principle, one that transcends the specific horrors of Nazism. Those in power will always seek to control the narrative, and often, the most dangerous truth to any power structure is the truth about the nature of women's loyalty to men. The Nazi state,
for all its evil, was a gynocentric state in its demands on male sacrifice. It demanded that men be disposable, that they offer their lives as currency for the state's expansion, with the promise that their women and children would be protected and would remain faithful. The Spengler Report proved that this promise was a lie. The system was willing to ask men to die for an illusion. This pattern did not end in 1945. It simply evolved. The modern world makes the same implicit contract with men. Work yourself to an early grave in a soul-crushing job. Take on debt. Assume all the risks. Be a provider. The promised reward? Stability, respect, and the loyal woman by your side. But just as in 1943, that loyalty is conditional. It is conditional on your performance, your status, your ability to continually provide a sense of security and advantage. When you fail, when you show vulnerability, when the market crashes and you lose your job, the mechanism of betrayal is eerily similar. The divorce papers replace the Dear John letter, but the underlying principle is the same. The Spengler Report is not just a historical document, it is a mirror. It shows men the uncomfortable reality that their worth in the eyes of the system, and often in the eyes of the women the system conditions, is transactional. Understanding this is not about succumbing to bitterness. It is the first, essential step toward liberation. It is the moment you stop living for external validation and start building a core of unshakable self-worth that cannot be taken from you by the fickleness of circumstance or the betrayal of others.
But the story doesn't end with the filed-away report. The truth has a way of seeping out. And the aftermath of this suppression, the psychological impact on the men who fought and returned to a shattered world, is where the story becomes even darker and more directly relevant to the male experience today. Because the men who came home from the POW camps in 1945, or who trudged back from the Eastern Front, didn't just find their cities in ruins. They found their lives stolen, their wives gone, and their children calling another man father. The great silence that fell over Germany after the war wasn't just the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a generation of men who had been psychologically castrated, first by the state that betrayed them, and then by the peace that offered them no justice. But what happened when the soldiers came home? The war was lost, the report was still buried, and millions of men were about to confront the brutal reality that the Spengler Report had predicted. Now we will descend into the chaos of post-war Germany, a world where the betrayed became the forgotten. We will uncover the stories of these men, their silent trauma, and how the victorious Allies, in a stunning twist of historical irony, inadvertently perpetuated the very same cycle of male disposability. The burial of the report was only the beginning. The real tragedy was what happened when the truth was left to rot in the ground. The silence of the grave that fell over Europe in May of 1945 was not a peaceful one. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of ash, regret, and unspoken truths. For the millions of German men who began the long, humiliating trek back to what was left of their homeland, the battle was not over. It was merely transforming. They had survived a war of steel and fire, only to be marched into a new, more insidious war of the spirit. These were the men, the boys who had become old in the frozen hell of Stalingrad, the soldiers who had witnessed the industrial slaughter of the Eastern Front, the prisoners who had endured years of starvation and brutality in Soviet camps. They were returning to a world they had been promised was worth dying for. But the Spengler Report, buried in the ashes of the SS headquarters, had already prophesied the hollow victory that awaited them. The front line they were about to face was the threshold of their own homes. Imagine him. His name is Eric. He is 24 years old, but carries the face of a man of 50. His uniform is in tatters, his body racked with dysentery, his mind a haunted gallery of the friends he saw blown to pieces.
For 3 years, his only sustenance, his only reason to claw his way through one more day in a Siberian labor camp, was the memory of his wife Greta. Her face, the smell of her hair, the sound of her laughter, these were sacred relics he protected from the encroaching madness. After a journey of months, walking, hitching on carts, he finally stands on the street where he once lived. The city is a jagged silhouette against the sky, a landscape of rubble. But his building, miraculously, still stands. With a heart pounding, not with joy, but with a terrifying, hopeful dread, he climbs the stairs. He knocks on the door. It opens. And there stands Greta. She is older, harder, her eyes guarded. Behind her, a child, a little girl of about 2, hides in her skirts, staring at the skeletal stranger in the doorway. And then a man's voice calls from inside the apartment. "Who is it, Greta?" In that moment, Eric's entire world, the one he had fought for, suffered for, and survived for, evaporates. He is not a returning hero. He is a ghost, an inconvenient reminder of a past everyone is desperate to forget. This scene, in its countless variations, was the true legacy of the buried Spengler Report. It was a silent, domestic apocalypse playing out on a scale of millions. The returning soldiers encountered a society turned upside down. The men were gone, and in their absence, a new social order had emerged, one run by and for women. This was the Trümmerfrauen narrative, the rubble women, that would later be celebrated as a symbol of German resilience. Strong, indefatigable women clearing the bricks of their shattered cities with their bare hands. And there was truth in this. Women did perform heroic, back-breaking labor. But this image, promoted heavily in the post-war years, served to obscure a darker, more complex reality. It painted a picture of universal female virtue and sacrifice, effectively whitewashing the rampant infidelity and social fragmentation that the Spengler Report had documented. For every woman clearing rubble out of civic duty, there was another who had secured her survival through more pragmatic and often ruthless means. The rubble these men had to clear was not just physical, it was the rubble of their own identities, the shattered illusion of their place in the world.
The mechanisms of betrayal were coldly efficient. Many returning soldiers found that their wives had initiated divorce proceedings during their absence, often on the grounds of abandonment, a breathtaking legal fiction where the state-sanctioned act of going to war was twisted into a personal failing of the husband. The courts, now staffed by officials trying to demonstrate their denazification credentials, overwhelmingly sided with the women. Men who had spent years in POW camps returned to find their property seized, their bank accounts emptied, and their children given the surnames of their mother's new lovers. The phenomenon was so widespread it earned a name: Uncle Erik syndrome. The Uncle Erik syndrome, where a child would be taught to call the returning biological father uncle to avoid confusing them with the new man in the house, the man who represented stability and, most importantly, access to resources from the occupying Allied forces. This is where the historical irony becomes so thick you could choke on it. The victorious Allies, the Americans, British, and French, who had fought to destroy the Nazi ideology of racial superiority, now became the unwitting actors in the final act of the Spengler Report's prophecy. The report had identified that female loyalty shifted towards men who offered heightened status and security. In 1945, there was no greater symbol of status and security than a member of the victorious Allied armies. The American GI, with his cigarettes, his nylon stockings, his chocolate,
and his seemingly inexhaustible supply of canned food was a god walking the earth. He represented the ultimate hypergamous leap. For a German woman, association with an American was a ticket out of the starvation and despair of the post-war years. The term Fräulein Wunder was coined, often with a sleazy, comedic tone that masked the profound tragedy at its core. It described the eager fraternization between German women and Allied soldiers. But for the German men, watching from the shadows, emaciated and defeated, it was not a wonder. It was the final, humiliating confirmation of their utter disposability. They had lost the war, and now they were losing their women to the very men who had defeated them. The Spengler report's cold analysis that loyalty follows resources was being played out on a grand geopolitical scale. The victors not only took the spoils of war, they often took the wives and daughters of the vanquished.
The psychological impact on these men is almost impossible to overstate. This was a trauma with no name, no recognition, and no outlet. They could not speak of their pain. To complain was to be labeled a sore loser, a Nazi sympathizer, a man unable to accept the consequences of a war his nation had started. Their trauma was deemed illegitimate. They were expected to simply swallow their pride, their grief, and their rage, and get to work rebuilding a nation that had, in their eyes, betrayed them twice. First, by sending them to a futile war, and second, by discarding them upon their return. This created a generation of silent, hollow men. They became the stoic, emotionally distant fathers and grandfathers of the German Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. They poured all of their unexpressed anguish into their work, building the factories and offices of the new Germany, while their inner world remained a frozen Stalingrad. The male spirit was not broken on the battlefield. It was systematically dismantled in the quiet treachery of the post-war home. This silent trauma did not vanish. It was inherited. The sons of these men grew up with a father who was a ghost in his own house, physically present but emotionally absent, incapable of warmth, quick to anger, and utterly incapable of articulating why. These sons never learned how to be men from their fathers because their fathers had been psychologically neutered by a trauma they could not name. They inherited a legacy of shame, silence, and a deep, unspoken suspicion of women and the institutions that protected them. The chain of male trauma was forged link by link, from the state that demanded everything, to the women whose loyalty proved conditional, to the sons who were raised without a map to their own masculinity. This is the real, lingering poison of the Buried Report. Its suppression ensured that the wound would never be cleaned, never be treated, and would instead fester for generations. The story of the Spengler Report is, therefore, not a relic. It is the foundational case study for understanding the modern male condition. The specific ideology of the Third Reich is an extreme, but the underlying dynamic is a universal constant. Look at the world today. The modern system makes the same implicit contract with men that the Nazi state did, albeit in a softer, more insidious form. You are not asked to die in a trench, but you are expected to sacrifice your health, your time, your youth, and your spirit on the altar of the corporate ladder. You are told to be a provider, a protector, a stoic rock. The promised reward is a family, a loyal partner, a place of respect. But the system, just like the Nazi state, is built on a lie. It refuses to acknowledge the dark, uncomfortable truths about human nature that the Spengler Report laid bare. It promotes a fantasy of unconditional female loyalty, while constructing a legal and social framework that makes betrayal not just easy, but often incentivized. When a man fails to provide, when he loses his job, when he suffers a mental health crisis, when he simply shows vulnerability, the mechanisms of disposability click into place with the same cold efficiency as a 1944 divorce court. The Dear John letter is now a text message. The new Gauleiter's assistant is the hyper-successful CEO or the charming new man he meets at the office. The principle is identical.
Understanding this is not a descent into misogyny. It is the first and most crucial step toward genuine masculine empowerment. The black pill is not about hating women. It is about seeing the game clearly, with all its brutal rules, for the first time. The Spengler Report is the ultimate black pill document because it provides historical, empirical proof that the romantic ideal sold to men is a dangerous fantasy. The liberation comes when you stop playing the game by rules designed for you to lose. When you internalize the fact that your worth cannot and should not be contingent on your utility to a woman or a state that views you as disposable, you become free. Your mission shifts from seeking external validation to building an internal fortress. Your purpose is no longer to be a hero in a story written by others, but to become the author of your own story. The men who survived the post-war silence ultimately did so by turning inward. They found solace not in a society that had rejected them, but in the quiet dignity of their own labor, in the small communities of other broken men, in the stoic acceptance of a world they could not change. Theirs was a grim, uncelebrated resilience. But your path does not have to be so bleak. You have the advantage of hindsight. You have the Spengler Report, not as a source of despair, but as a key. It unlocks the understanding that the feelings of betrayal, the confusion, the anger you may feel are not a personal failing. They are the rational response of a man waking up to the nature of the system he was born into. Your duty is not to rebuild a nation that does not value you. Your duty is to rebuild yourself. Forge a purpose that is yours alone. Cultivate a strength that is not dependent on the approval of others. Build a life that cannot be taken from you by the fickleness of circumstance. The darkest truth the Nazis ever buried was not about the women. It was about the system's absolute willingness to sacrifice the masculine soul. Knowing that truth is your armor. Living in spite of it is your victory. The report was buried so that men would never learn this lesson. Now that you know, the silence is finally broken.